Let's kick things off with a question that sounds super simple on the surface, but is actually, incredibly deep. What exactly is social work? Now, you might think you have an idea, but having a really clear, professional answer is absolutely crucial. And that's exactly what we're going to build together today.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to explore why this question is way more complex than it looks. Then, we'll dive right into the official global definition, unpacking its core actions, its guiding principles, and the 3 different levels of practice. And we'll wrap up by making a really important distinction, that social work is a true profession, not just a feeling of compassion.
All right, first up, let's get into why the seemingly simple question is anything but, and why we need to move past our common everyday ideas about social work.
I mean, seriously, if you go out and ask this question, especially somewhere as huge and diverse as India, you're going to get a dozen different answers. And that's really because the work itself touches people's lives in just so many different ways.
A field worker might say, oh, it's about helping the poor. A counselor in a hospital might say it's all about supporting patients. Then a community organizer will talk about bringing women's groups together, while a policy advocate is focused on changing the laws themselves. And here's the thing, they're all partly right. It just hints at the massive, massive scope of this profession.
So what's the real difference between a professional social worker and, say, just a really kind, helpful neighbor? Well, it's definitely not about who cares more. A good neighbor brings that wonderful empathy and sense of fairness. But a professional social worker, they bring a whole toolkit, a systematic, knowledge-based practice, a clear method, accountability, and a deep awareness of the larger systems at play.
Okay, so this brings us to what I like to call our master key, the global definition. We're going to look at the internationally accepted answer from the International Federation of Social Workers, or IFSW, which really sets the gold standard for the profession in over 140 countries.
Okay, I know, that is a mouthful. It's a really dense definition, right? But every single phrase in there was chosen so carefully after consulting with people all over the world. It talks about social work being a practice-based profession and an academic discipline, that it promotes social change, empowerment, and liberation. So let's actually break down what those key phrases really mean in practice.
So let's start decoding the heart of that definition, really focusing on its core mission: action, change, and empowerment.
First up, it's a practice-based profession. What does that mean? It means social work is about doing. It's not some armchair philosophy. The knowledge is constantly being tested and improved right there, on the ground, working with real people. The famous concurrent fieldwork model at TIS in India is the perfect example of this. Students are literally learning by doing from day one.
At the same time, though, it's also an academic discipline. See, this isn't just improvised, well-intentioned helping. Social work is built on a solid foundation of theory and research from sociology, psychology, law, you name it. This intellectual rigor is what allows a social worker to look past the symptoms and really analyze the root causes of a problem.
And this part is absolutely crucial. It promotes social change. Social workers are agents of transformation. They don't just stand by and observe suffering, they actively work to dismantle the harmful structures that create it in the first place. This idea connects the profession directly to India's powerful history of social movements, from Dr. Ambedkar's anti-caste work to the fight for the right to information.
Now check this out, because the distinction between empowerment and liberation is so interesting. Empowerment is about building up an individual's capacity and confidence, right? Helping them access their rights. But liberation? That goes a step further. It's about freeing entire groups of people from oppressive structures, like caste or patriarchy. This is really the philosophical heart of social work. It rejects charity and champions self-determination.
So, what guides all this action? Well, that brings us to the profession's moral compass, the 4 non-negotiable guiding principles.
First, you have social justice, which means actively confronting unfair systems. Then there are human rights, framing problems as rights being violated, not as sad stories needing charity. Third is collective responsibility, which means seeing poverty as a challenge for all of society, not just a personal failing. And finally, respect for diversities, which in a nation like India isn't just a nice idea, it's a daily, practical necessity.
So we've got the theory, we've got the principles, but how does this all translate into what social workers actually do? Well, let's look at the 3 levels of practice.
Okay, so you can think of it in 3 layers.
At the micro level, you're working directly with individuals and families, like counseling a survivor of domestic violence. At the meso or middle level, you're working with groups and organizations, like training a group of community health workers. And at the macro level, you're looking at the big picture, the whole system, like advocating for policy reform with government officials.
And here is the key insight, the thing that makes this work so dynamic. Most social workers are constantly dancing between all three of these levels. Just imagine a field worker helping a single widow get her pension. That's micro. Then she organizes a meeting to train other neighbors on how to access their rights. That's meso. And finally, she documents the systemic flaws in the pension system for an advocacy campaign. Boom, that's macro. All in a day's work.
All right, let's bring it all home and make one final, absolutely critical distinction. Social work is a profession, not just a feeling of compassion.
So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Let's be crystal clear. Social work is a profession with formal training and a code of ethics. It is about empowerment and is rooted in a structural, rights-based analysis. And just as importantly, it is not simply having good intentions. It's not about charity or creating dependency. It is a structured, accountable, and professional practice.
And that brings us to the end. I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Now that you have this framework, where do you see these principles and practices, micro, meso, macro, empowerment, social justice, playing out in your own work or in your own community? It's a really powerful lens to see the world through.